The market of the alien colony was always loud, always full of smells of food and the sound of traders calling out prices. But for her, the hungry widow, all those smells were painful reminders of what she could not have. She walked slowly through the crowded street, her body thin, her clothes torn. Her eyes searched the ground for scraps, maybe a fallen piece of bread or fruit that someone had dropped. Once, long ago, she had lived with a mate. He had worked hard, and she had cooked warm meals. But the war came and everything was taken from her. Now she was alone, with no family, no coin, and no home. Many called her cursed because she had survived while others had not. No one wanted to help her. No one wanted to see her. The alien traders pulled their food stands closer when she came near. A woman selling sweet cakes waved her hand angrily and said, "Go away, beggar, you scare my customers." A group of men laughed when her weak legs shook and she almost fell. They threw the cores of fruit at her feet, not to feed her, but to mock her. Her stomach growled loudly and she pressed her hand against it. She thought of her mate, of the last time they had shared a warm drink together. She thought of how he had promised to keep her safe. But promises did not survive wars. She had lost him, and now she was losing herself too. Her head spun from hunger, and the world seemed a blur. She stopped near a food stall where a human father was buying bread for his little daughter. The man wore simple clothes and his hands looked rough, the hands of a worker. His daughter held his arm and laughed, holding a small toy made of wood. The widow stared too long at the bread in his hands, and the smell of it made her mouth water. The daughter noticed her. She had big, innocent eyes that saw not an alien, not a beggar, but just a tired woman. The little girl whispered something to her father, pointing at the widow. The father glanced at the widow quickly, then looked away, maybe out of pity, maybe out of habit. He gave his daughter the bread, and they began to walk past her. The widow lowered her head. She had seen this many times. People looked. People pitied, and then they turned their backs. That was always the way. She was used to being invisible. But then something strange happened. The little girl tugged at her father's arm and stopped walking. She turned and ran a few steps toward the widow, holding the bread in her tiny hand. The father called her name in surprise, but she ignored him. She stood in front of the widow, looking up with wide eyes. "Why are you hungry?" the girl asked softly. Her voice was not filled with fear or disgust, only simple kindness. The widow did not know what to answer. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Tears burned in her eyes. The father came quickly, taking the girl's hand. "Don't bother her," he said gently, not unkind, but protective. He gave the widow a quick look, the kind of look that said he understood her pain, but did not know what to do about it. The little girl held the bread tightly. She looked at her father and then back at the widow. And then, in the middle of the busy market, she spoke the words that would change everything. "Marry my dad," she said in her small, serious voice, "and you will always have warm meals." The market noise seemed to fade. The widow's heart stopped for a moment. The father froze, his face turning red with shock. People nearby turned their heads, whispering and laughing. But for the widow, the world was silent except for those words. Warm meals. A home. A family. She could not believe what she had just heard. Her thin hands trembled as she stared at the child. For the first time in years, hope flickered inside her chest. The market stood frozen for a moment after the little girl spoke. Her innocent voice carried louder than the traders shouting prices, louder than the hiss of frying food, louder than the crowd. Everyone nearby heard her. A human child had just offered her father's hand in marriage to a starving alien widow. The father's face turned red with shock. He bent down quickly and whispered to his daughter, "Hush, that is not something you say." But the girl looked at him with wide, honest eyes. "But Dad," she said, "she is hungry. If she marries you, she won't be hungry anymore." The widow stood frozen in place. She could not even breathe. Her thin lips trembled, and her heart beat so fast it hurt. She did not know whether to laugh, cry, or run away. In her long and lonely life, she had been insulted, ignored, and mocked. But never had anyone, especially a child, offered her something so simple, so impossible, and so kind. The traders nearby started whispering. Some laughed and nudged each other. "Did you hear that?" One alien man chuckled. "The human girl wants her father to feed the beggar forever." Others frowned, muttering that it was dangerous to let aliens mix with humans like this. The father straightened and gently pulled his daughter's hand. "Come on," he said firmly, trying to walk away. But the little girl planted her small feet on the dusty ground. She refused to move. She looked again at the widow, who stood shaking, her empty eyes full of surprise. The girl raised her piece of bread toward the widow. "Here," she said softly. "You can eat this until Dad makes you more food." The widow's throat ached as she tried to speak. I cannot," she whispered, her voice rough and weak. Her pride told her not to take food from a child, but her empty stomach twisted, and her hands shook as if they wanted to reach out on their own. The father sighed heavily, looking embarrassed, but also troubled. He bent down again. "Sweetheart," he whispered to his daughter, "we cannot just invite strangers into our family. She is not like us." The girl's face turned serious in a way that looked too old for her young years. "But you always say no one should be hungry, Dad," she said firmly. "You always tell me kindness makes us strong." She turned to the widow again. "She is not a stranger. She looks sad. We can help her." The father looked into his daughter's determined eyes and felt his heart ache. He could not argue with the truth of her words, but he also knew the risk. The colony was not kind to aliens. He would be mocked, maybe even punished. Yet his daughter's grip on his arm was strong, and her small act of innocence had already changed something. Slowly, the widow lowered her gaze. Her cheeks burned with shame and hope mixed together. "I do not deserve this," she whispered. Her voice cracked like broken glass. "I am nothing, just a widow with no home." The little girl shook her head. "No. You are someone who needs family. We can be that." The father rubbed his forehead. He felt the weight of many eyes watching. He had no answer to give, no easy way out. But he could not ignore what had just happened. The words of his daughter still rang in his ears. "Marry my dad, and you will always have warm meals." For a long moment, man, child, and widow stood in silence in the middle of the busy market. The crowd slowly moved on, but the three of them were locked in a strange circle of fate. Finally, the father sighed and broke the silence. He looked at the widow and said quietly, "You can come with us. Just for tonight. For a meal." The widow's knees almost gave way. She clutched her chest, feeling her heart pounding. It was not marriage, not family, not a promise of forever, but it was a beginning. And for her, even one night of warmth and food felt like a miracle. The path back to the human's home was quiet. The market's noise faded behind them, replaced by the crunch of gravel under tired feet. The widow followed at a distance, unsure if she should really go. Her heart beat fast and doubt filled her mind. What if this was a trick? What if they changed their minds halfway and told her to leave? She almost turned back more than once, but the little girl kept glancing over her shoulder, smiling every time their eyes met. That smile pulled the widow forward step after step. It had been years since anyone had looked at her with such open kindness. The father walked ahead, silent and thoughtful. His hands were rough from work, his shoulders broad but heavy with responsibility. He wondered if he was making a mistake. Bringing an alien widow into his home could bring trouble from neighbors, maybe even worse. Yet he remembered the empty look in her eyes at the market. He remembered his daughter's words. He could not ignore them. They reached a small wooden house near the edge of the colony. It was not big or rich, but it was clean and warm. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of soup. The widow stopped at the gate, staring at it as if it were a palace. Her thin fingers gripped the post tightly. "I should not," she whispered. "This is not for me." The father turned, his face serious but not unkind. "It's just one night," he said quietly. "You can leave in the morning if you wish. But tonight, you will eat." The widow lowered her eyes. Slowly she stepped through the gate, her body trembling as if the earth itself might reject her. The little girl ran ahead, pushing open the door with excitement. Come in," she called. Inside, the widow froze. The warmth of the fire touched her skin, and the smell of bread and stew wrapped around her like a blanket. Her chest ached. It had been so long since she had felt anything like this. She stood at the doorway, afraid to step further. The little girl pulled her hand. "Sit here," she said, pointing at a chair near the table. The widow obeyed slowly, lowering herself into the chair as if it were made of gold. Her eyes darted around the room, shelves with jars of food, a small bed for the child, a simple blanket folded neatly. Everything looked precious. The father ladled stew into a bowl and placed it in front of her. Steam rose from the thick broth, and vegetables floated in it. The widow's hands shook as she wrapped her fingers around the bowl. For a moment she just stared at it. She whispered softly, "It is too much. I cannot repay you." The father sat across the table. His face was calm but firm. "It's not about payment. It's about need." The little girl clapped her hands happily. "Eat before it gets cold." The widow lifted the spoon, and when the first taste touched her tongue, her eyes filled with tears. It was not just food, it was safety, warmth, and dignity. She tried to eat slowly, but hunger betrayed her. She finished the bowl quickly, ashamed but grateful. The father quietly filled it again. When her stomach finally stopped aching, the widow sat back in the chair. She felt dizzy, not from hunger, but from the kindness she had just received. She looked at the man and whispered, Why do this for me?" The father leaned back, his eyes resting on his daughter, who was now drawing pictures on the floor. His voice was steady. "Because my child reminded me that no one should go hungry, not even you." The widow lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had been invisible for so long, unwanted and forgotten. But tonight, in this small human home, she was seen. For the first time in years, she felt something she thought was lost forever. Hope. That night, the alien widow sat in the corner of the small human home, unsure of what to do with herself. The warmth from the fire touched her skin, but she still felt cold inside, as if her body refused to believe she was safe. Every shadow on the wall made her flinch. Every sound of wood crackling in the fire made her tense. She was not used to walls around her or a roof above her head. For so long, she had only known the open streets, the sharp winds, and the endless hunger. The human father moved around the room calmly, as if nothing strange had happened. He set aside his tools near the door, checked the locks on the windows, and placed another log into the fire. His daughter played on the floor, humming to herself while she moved her wooden toys. Their life looked so ordinary, so normal, yet, to the widow, it felt unreal. The girl crawled over to her and tugged gently at her sleeve. "You can sleep here tonight," she said cheerfully, pointing at a small bed pushed against the wall. The widow froze. She had not slept in a bed since before the war. She shook her head quickly. No, I cannot. I will sleep on the floor." The girl frowned. "The floor is hard. The bed is soft. You are tired. Beds are for people, not floors." Her small voice carried so much truth that the widow had no words. She glanced at the father for support, but he only shrugged. "She's right," he said. "The bed is there. Use it if you wish." The widow's throat tightened. She lowered her gaze, unable to argue. The idea of lying down on soft blankets felt too much like a dream. What if she woke up and it all disappeared? Later, when the girl had fallen asleep in her father's arms, the widow still sat awake, watching. The fire glowed softly, painting the room in warm light. The human father noticed her restless eyes. "You are safe here," he said, quietly. No one will hurt you tonight. The widow's hands gripped her knees. Safe. She repeated the word like it was foreign to her. Safe was something she had not been in years. She wanted to believe it, but fear still clung to her like chains. "Why do you trust me?" she asked. "I am not human. Many here will not accept me." The father's gaze was steady. "I don't trust easily," he admitted. "But I trust what my daughter sees. She saw you. That is enough for now." His words were strange, but they touched something deep inside her. No one had spoken to her like that before. Most people saw her as a burden, a curse, or simply nothing at all. But here was a man saying she was seen. She finally stood and walked slowly to the bed. Her legs trembled as she touched the blanket. It was soft, far softer than the cold stone she usually slept on. Carefully, as if afraid it might break, she lay down. For a long while she stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the human home. The child's soft breathing, the steady rhythm of the father moving about. Her body remained tense at first, ready to run. But slowly, the warmth of the blanket and the fire seeped into her bones. Her eyes grew heavy. For the first time in years, she felt her body loosen. She was not on guard, not hiding in alleys, not shivering in the cold. She was simply lying down, in a place that felt safe. Before sleep took her, she whispered into the quiet room so softly that no one could hear, "Thank you." And in that small home, surrounded by two humans she had only just met, the widow slept in peace for the first time since her world had been destroyed. The next morning, the widow woke to the sound of birds outside the window. For a moment she forgot where she was. The warmth of the blanket, the smell of fresh bread, and the soft light of dawn all felt like fragments of a dream. Then she saw the little girl asleep nearby and remembered. She was inside a human home. Her chest tightened. Part of her wanted to stay in that dream forever. Another part feared it would all vanish if she held on to it too tightly. The father was already awake, busy preparing food. He glanced at her quietly but said nothing. He seemed to understand that she was still adjusting. He placed a piece of bread and a cup of warm drink on the table. She hesitated, but the smell pulled her forward. When she ate, she tried to eat slowly this time, not like the night before when hunger had made her desperate. The little girl woke soon after, stretching and smiling brightly. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, as if the widow had always been part of the family. The girl took her hand without asking and pulled her to sit near the fire. The widow's heart ached at such innocence. But as the warmth of the home wrapped around her, memories began to surface, sharp and painful. Her smile faded and her gaze dropped to the floor. The father noticed the change. He sat across from her, his rough hands folded. "You remember something?" he said quietly. It was not a question. She nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "I remember everything." Her voice was soft but heavy, carrying years of sorrow. She began to speak, though each word felt like a stone she was lifting from her chest. "There was a time when I was not like this," she said. "I had a mate. He was strong, kind, and full of laughter. He worked the fields and I cooked warm meals. We did not have much, but it was enough. We dreamed of children, of a home filled with voices. Then the war came." Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "Our city burned. Soldiers came, not caring who lived or died. My mate fought to protect me, but he never returned. I searched for him among the dead, but there was nothing left, only smoke and silence." The little girl's hand squeezed hers gently. The widow swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I ran and I kept running," she said. "I thought I would find safety in another place, but every door closed, every eye turned away. I was only a widow, useless, cursed. I begged, I starved. I learned to hide from kindness because kindness always disappeared. What I had left were only memories and hunger." Tears slid down her cheeks as she finished. The fire's glow blurred in her vision. She hated herself for speaking so much, for showing her weakness. But the words had been locked inside her for too long, and once they came out, she could not stop them. The room was silent except for the crackling fire. The father's face was unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet, "Wait," he finally spoke. "War takes too much from all of us," he said simply. His voice was calm, not pitying. The widow looked up, surprised. Most people either mocked her story or turned away. But this man sat still, listening without judgment. It felt strange, like her pain mattered to someone for the first time in years. The little girl leaned against her arm. "You're not alone anymore," she said firmly. Her small voice carried more strength than armies. The widow's heart trembled. Memories of pain would never vanish, but sitting in that warm home, with a human father and his brave little girl, she felt something new pressing against the weight of sorrow. It was not joy, not yet. But it was the beginning of healing. For 2 days, the widow stayed quietly inside the human's home. She helped with small tasks, sweeping the floor, washing the dishes, gathering wood. The little girl followed her around like a shadow, asking questions and laughing. The father did not say much, but he allowed her presence. In that short time, the widow felt more peace than she had in years. But peace in one house did not mean peace outside. The colony was small, and people noticed everything. Neighbors began to whisper when they saw the human father walking with the alien widow to fetch water. Some stopped talking when she passed. Others stared openly. At first, she tried to ignore. She kept her eyes low, holding the bucket, pretending she did not hear. But whispers travel fast. "Why is she here?" one woman muttered to another. "That widow is cursed. Her people brought war, and now she lives with a human man?" Another scoffed. "Maybe she plans to trick him. Maybe she wants his food, his house. Aliens are never to be trusted." The words cut her like knives. She had heard such things before, but now it hurt more. Because this time, she had something to lose. When she returned to the house, she stayed silent, afraid to bring shame upon the man and his daughter. But the father noticed her heavy steps, the way her shoulders bent under invisible weight. "They spoke again, didn't they?" he asked, quietly. She nodded. Her voice trembled. "I should not be here. Your people will hate me. They will hate you." The father's jaw tightened. "Let them talk," he said firmly. "My home is mine. No one tells me who I can feed under my roof." His words gave her strength, but doubt still haunted her. She did not want to cause trouble for the only people who had shown her kindness. The next day, the tension grew worse. A group of men stood outside the well when she and the father came to fetch water. They stepped forward, blocking her path. "You don't belong here," one man said coldly. "This colony is for humans. We don't need aliens stealing from our tables." The widow lowered her gaze, clutching the bucket tightly. The father stepped in front of her, his voice calm but firm. "She is not stealing, she is my guest." The men laughed harshly. "A guest, is that what you call it? Don't be fooled. She's only here because she's hungry. Today it's food, tomorrow it's your bed. What will your daughter grow up seeing? A monster at her table?" The widow's chest burned with shame. She wanted to shout that she was not a monster, that she had never asked for more than survival. But her voice would not come. The father's eyes hardened. "Say what you want about me," he said, his tone sharp. "But you will not insult her in front of my daughter." The men sneered, but they did not push further. Still, their words hung heavy in the air. When they returned home, the widow sat by the fire in silence. Her hands trembled as she held the HFY wooden cup the girl had given her. Finally, she whispered, "I should leave. You and your child should not suffer because of me." The little girl rushed to her side, wrapping small arms around her. "No, don't leave. You're part of us now. I want you here." The widow's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the father, searching for rejection in his face. But he only sighed and shook his head. "The world outside may not accept you," he said, "but in this house you are safe." For the first time, the widow realized that safety did not always mean being liked by others. Sometimes safety meant having even just 2 people who refused to let go of you, but deep in her heart she feared the whispers would not end here. And she was right. The whispers turned into stares, and the stares into warnings. By the end of the week, many in the colony avoided the widow completely. Mothers pulled their children close when she passed. Men muttered that she was a danger. The father ignored them, but the widow felt the pressure like a heavy chain. One night, the trouble they feared arrived. The colony slept under the dim glow of lanterns. The widow was awake, sitting near the fire with her thoughts. She heard a faint noise outside, the snap of a twig, the soft crunch of boots. Her body tensed. She knew that sound. It was the sound of predators moving in the dark. She rose quietly and moved to the window. In the shadows, she saw figures slipping between houses, carrying blades and crude weapons. Bandits. The colony was vulnerable, its guards few and lazy. The widow's breath quickened. She turned to wake the father, but before she could, a loud crash shook the street. The bandits had broken into the nearest house. Shouts and screams tore through the night. The father woke instantly, grabbing a tool from beside the door. "Stay inside," he told her firmly. "Protect my daughter." He moved toward the door, ready to fight, but the widow stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though her hands shook. "No. I know how they move. I have seen men like them before. If you go alone, you will die." The little girl stirred from her sleep, her frightened eyes wide. "Don't go, Dad," she cried, clinging to his arm. The widow knelt before the child and touched her shoulder. "I will not let harm come to him, or to you." Something inside her that had been buried by years of hunger and shame began to rise again. She remembered who she had once been, not just a widow, not just a beggar, but someone strong, someone who had survived when others had fallen. The father hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Stay behind me," he said. They stepped out into the chaos together. The street was filled with firelight and screams. Bandits dragged sacks of food from homes, striking down anyone who resisted. One of them saw the widow and sneered. "Look, what we have here. An alien rat hiding with humans." The widow's fear turned into fire. Before the bandit could strike, she lunged forward. With strength hidden under her frail frame, she grabbed his arm and twisted. The blade clattered to the ground. She drove her knee into his stomach, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The father's eyes widened in shock, but there was no time to speak. More bandits rushed forward. Together, the human and the widow fought side by side. He swung his heavy tool with the precision of a worker used to hard labor, while she moved fast and sharp, her alien instincts guiding her. One bandit tried to enter their home, but the widow saw him and roared, a sound that froze him in his tracks. She threw herself at him, protecting the door where the little girl hid. Her thin frame hid a strength no one expected. The man hit the ground hard, and she pressed his blade away from him until he fled in terror. Neighbors who had whispered against her now watched in shock. The cursed widow, the unwanted alien, was the one shielding their homes. Her cries rang through the night, not of weakness but of defiance. When the last of the bandits ran into the dark, the colony lay in silence. People stepped out of their homes slowly, their eyes wide. The widow stood in the center of the street, her chest heaving, her arms scratched but strong. The father stood beside her, and the little girl rushed out, wrapping her arms around the widow's waist. "You saved us," the child whispered, her voice trembling with awe. The widow looked down at her shaking hands. For the first time in years, they had not reached for scraps. They had reached to protect. And for the first time, the colony saw her not as a burden, but as a shield.